I'll go ahead and start recording the session. So the IRS did put some new guidelines into place for 1099 and 1096 processing active for the 2020 tax year. So we're kicking off the year by covering what those changes will be and what you guys as the SAP users can do to work around that and set yourself up for success in the years to come. So if you've joined webinars before, I'm sure you've seen my face. I have the pleasure of coordinating and working with clients, getting the feedback and putting on these training webinars every month. And joining me this month for his first webinar is Ben Grassi. He has done extensive work and research and testing to make sure that we give you guys all of the information for this new 1099 change.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, this is my first webinar. I'm really excited to be here. Got really familiar with 1099s the past couple of months, so excited to share all this information and help you get a little bit more out of your SAP system. Thanks, Beth.
Perfect. So moving on, like I said, our objective today is really to give you guys a full understanding of what these main 1099 changes are from the IRS, and then beyond that, what different things you might need to do in SAP to support the new requirements. So what we'll go over today, we'll start with just a quick recap of our year-end activities webinar. For any of you that joined our webinar in December, Oren and Lauren reviewed all of the different activities that need to happen for year-end closing. So we'll just do a quick recap on that and then jump into what these new 1099 requirements are from the IRS. From there, Ben's going to take over and we'll go into our live demo. And this will, first we're just going to do a quick recap on the 1099 setup in SAP, what needs to happen on the business partner level, what, boxes and things need to be set up, and then what reports are available in SAP to support the 1099 processing. Then finally, we'll get into the good stuff, jump into what your options are for handling 1099s this year and how you can set yourself up for the years to come. And as always, we will provide documentation. Ben's put together some really great documentation for how to make these changes, and we'll open it up for Q&A as well at the end. But as we go through the demo and as you see things, feel free to enter any questions you have into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go, so we'll make sure to answer those. Perfect. So just as a quick recap, this year-end activities webinar that we did in December, it is available. So, once we post the webinar or the blog for this webinar, you'll get, this PowerPoint here. It has the link there, but you can find it on our website as well. So they reviewed everything starting from our new period creation and definition, how to create those financial periods for, the upcoming year. They went over all of the different year-end closing activities that need to be done, how to run the period closing utility, all of the reports that are available in SAP to support the year-end closing, and then they did cover 1099 handling and reporting. And so, of course, today we're going to dive deeper into that, but they did cover that as well in that webinar and then provide all the documentation there. So without further ado, we'll jump into the 1099 changes this year. So like I said, there were a few big changes that the IRS made for the new 1099. So the biggest one of those being that they introduced a new 1099 NEC or non-employee compensation form. So Ben, if you could just click on that photo right there, it'll open up the link for the form. Okay, perfect. So this is that new 1099 NEC form. It used to just be a box on the 1099 MISC form, but now it has been changed to its own separate form. So this is the, the bulk of what's going to need to be adjusted and what Ben will go through to support that. The next change that we had that was made is the 1099 miscellaneous form box renumbering. So there's a little bit of renumbering done there to support this new form. We can open that back up. And of course, as we're going through these are the, the three big changes that were made and the three that, we identified as needing support in SAP. But of course, if there are any specific, any specific pieces of information relating to, your specific industry, always make sure to check with your tax specialist. And then last but not least, the 1096 cover sheet has a new checkbox on it that is used for that 1099 NEC form. So those are the three main changes here that took place. Like I said, always consult with the tax specialist if there are anything pertaining specifically to your industry, but otherwise these are the three main changes that we're going to be covering.
Thanks, Beth. So with those changes this year, the good news is everything inside Business One, for the most part, can stay the same. So all the data you've been tracking throughout the year doesn't actually need to change. It just needs to be reported on the IRS forms a little bit differently. So we've identified three options that you can use this year to handle these changes from the IRS. And the first of which is actually from SAP development. They've been working on a hot fix in SAP Business One version 10 that will include the new 1099 NEC form with a layout to go with it, as well as additional layouts for the 1096 to check the appropriate box. Now, SAP has told us that this release is only going to be on version 10 as a hot fix, and it's supposed to be out sometime at the end of January. Given that these forms need to be filed in a week by January 31st, we're really not moving forward with that to get these forms filed for 2020 tax filing season. We're going to suggest that this be something we look at doing during the 2021 year, and instead focus on the other two options for handling this year. The other two options, the second one is modifying the existing 1099 layouts. So as I said, all the data in B1 can actually stay where it is. We've done some research and found ways to modify the existing layouts and create additional layouts that can pull the data in and print out on the pre-printed forms from the IRS. If you're used to doing that every year, you just use the pre-printed forms and print directly out of SAP. The third option is using a third-party website and just using the out-of-the-box reports out of SAP, pulling the data out of the system, and then using a third-party website or a third-party software to generate the forms you need. New this year for that is we did create a query from Pioneer B1 that should help pull this data out of the system a little bit better. It just pulls some additional data points such as the business partner address and tax IDs. And all we ask is that you compare the data from that query to the out-of-the-box reports when you're generating the forms through a third-party website or software. So right now, with those three options in mind, we're going to jump right into a demo of how Business One is set up to handle 1099 and all the functionality you get out of the box with Business One. And then we'll dive deeper into the reports and the modification options for 2020 to get these filed on time. So let me switch over to Business One here. Okay. So first, there's a couple setup areas in Business One, and the first of which is under Administration, Setup, Financials, 1099 Table. And this is where you define the forms that you're going to be using. Out of the box, SAP actually comes with three predefined. The most popular that most companies use is the 1099 MISC, but you can always add additional forms here to track the data you need to track for your own processing needs. If you double click on a line, it will open up all the predefined boxes that come out of the box SAP as Business One as well. So if you're familiar with these IRS forms, you're used to all the boxes that you populate data into. And inside this setup, you also have the option to set minimum 1099 amounts. For instance, non-employee compensation, you don't have to report anything less than $600. So if you populate that amount there, you'll still be tracking it throughout the year, but when it comes time to do the reporting, you can exclude instances where the non-employee compensation is less than $600. So 1099 table usually comes, it comes set up out of the box, but you can always come in and modify it and add additional 1099 boxes as necessary. The second area of setup is actually on the business partner master record. And this is where you define for your vendors what form and box they're going to be utilizing throughout the year. So we'll go ahead and search for a business partner here, Anthony Smith, one of our vendors. Under the accounting tab, you have the option to set up a 1099 form and 1099 box. And these act as the default for the business partner. So anytime now when you create an AP invoice for that business partner, SAP will automatically pull in those defaults to track against. So we'll go ahead and create an AP invoice for this vendor. And under the accounting tab, you can see that it pulls in the 1099 MISC and the 1099 box for non-employee compensation. So when you create these invoices, SAP will automatically start tracking this data for you as you work in Business One throughout the year. Now, those are the two key setup areas for 1099 information. Once those are set up and configured, you can really kind of run your business throughout the year and track this data. There are two other functional pieces of the 1099 setup to help you get to the reporting stage. And the first of which is 1099 opening balances. 1099 opening balances, which are located under Administration, System Initialization, Opening Balances, 1099 opening balance, allows you to, if you're starting Business One, you're working with Business One in the middle of the year, or maybe you have a vendor that you want to track 1099 amounts against, but you forgot to set them up on their BP master, you can enter those amounts midway through the year using this tool. So we'll go ahead and run it wide open. And all it allows you to do is enter a vendor, such as we'll enter LaserCom here. And we'll just say, for instance, on their BP master record under the accounting tab, we didn't set up their 1099 form and 1099 boxes. So we've been doing business with them all year, but we haven't been tracking the 1099 amount properly. So we can add them here. We'll set a posting date of 12/31, oops, excuse me, 12/31/2020. Choose the right form there. There we go. And then we can choose the form and box that we want to report on for that vendor, such as non-employee compensation, and we can enter an amount that we were tracking throughout the year but didn't actually make it into the system. So, oh, my date didn't change there. So this allows you to enter those amounts for the vendor that you've been tracking all year in the system, but it hasn't actually been specified on the invoices. So when you click Update now, when you go to run your reporting, there will be an entry in the reporting for LaserCom for 2020 to the amount of $5,500 on the miscellaneous form in box 7. So that's 1099 opening balances. The other functional piece is 1099 editing, which allows you to make changes to entries that you've already put into the system. So under Financials, 1099 Editing, this report allows you to look at data you've already entered and then make adjustments as necessary. The first report type is Open Invoices and Credit Memos. This allows you to see everything that you haven't paid yet or you haven't paid the invoice yet and make adjustments to the 1099 form or 1099 box. So if I run this now, it's going to pull back invoices that haven't been paid yet, and you can see what 1099 form and box have been designated on that invoice, and you can make adjustments here and change that form or box. This is good for bulk changes. If you've been reporting something wrong for a vendor and you haven't paid those invoices yet, you can come in here and make changes instead of drilling into each individual invoice. The other option under 1099 editing is for invoices and credit memos not marked as submitted. So this is going to pull up all the invoices and credit memos that you've already paid, but the amounts for the 1099 might be incorrect. We're going to go through an example here. With those two report types, you can also always select different vendors or use different 1099 form or box selection to specify your results a little bit more. So when we run this report for invoices and credit memos not marked as submitted, we'll get a list, and this is going to be for everything in 2020 that we haven't submitted yet, and it's going to show how much 1099 amount has been on those invoices. So let's drill into an invoice here, such as 1176 for Anthony Smith, and we can see that there's some labor here for 2,500 and meals for 150. Now the meals for 150 we're not going to include in his 1099 amount. We only want to send him a 1099 for the 2,500. So we can go under 1099 editing here, and then reduce this 1099 amount to the 2,500 and click update, and SAP will use this new amount instead of the whole amount of the invoice. So it lets you, because on the invoice, if you recall, under the accounting tab, this is at a master header level setting for the entire invoice. It's not at the line level. So 1099 editing allows you to make those adjustments as necessary. So we got through 2020. We've been reporting all year, tracking our 1099 information for all our vendors, and now it's time to run the reporting. SAP Business One comes with several out-of-the-box reporting options that can be found under Financials, Financial Reporting, Accounting, 1099, 1096 Report. Additionally, this report can be found under the Reports module, Financials, Accounting, 1099, 1096 Report. There are actually 4 different reports that you can run using this, and then additional selection criteria. So there's a 1099 vendor summary report. So if we just run this wide open for that, it's going to pull back all the 1099 amounts with their form and boxes for all the vendors that you have selected. You can do a 1099 summary by form and box, which is going to break out your amounts by the 1099 form and box and then list all the vendors underneath that. And then the most important ones are the 1099 form and 1096 form, which are used for if you're going to be printing this data right out of Business One onto the pre-printed forms from the IRS. So this year, with the addition of the new 1099 NEC form, we needed to have a way of printing the appropriate data on the 1099 MISC and the appropriate data on the 1099 NEC. To accomplish this, we've actually recommend creating 2 layouts and then selecting the appropriate criteria. So for instance, if we're choosing the 1099 form here, we'll go under here and make sure we have our 1099 MISC, which is where we've been reporting the data all year. And then under 1099 boxes, we're going to select everything except non-employee compensation, because non-employee compensation, as we said, has to be reported on the 1099 NEC this year. So we're going to exclude that from our report criteria. We'll click OK. Some other criteria options here is the show not submitted and show submitted. Show not submitted, when you actually print out your 1099 forms, it will ask you if this is a final submission, and if you click yes, those will all be marked as submitted. So show not submitted is just looking for everything in the database that hasn't been submitted. You can include payments which are not based on invoices, and include vendors with 1099 amount lower than required, which is what we set up on the 1099 table. Further, you can specify vendors or vendor groups and your posting dates as well. So for this first run of the 1099, 1096 reporting, we're going to just be looking to populate our 1099 miscellaneous. So we're going to click OK here. We've excluded non-employee compensation for now, so we get our amounts back. And normally you would go to print preview, review the information, and then print it out on the forums. Now, since the 1099 MISC has been renumbered for this year, we've had to modify the layout. So if you go up into the toolbar here and choose Layout Designer, in your system, you'll be able to create additional layouts to choose from. And I'm going to choose this one here, the 1099 form MISC 2 version 2, which has been modified to match the layout for 2020. We'll click OK. And now when we do print preview, it's going to pull in all the data from the report we ran and show it populated in the places that it will go on the 1099 miscellaneous form updated for 2020. So once you print those out, and we always recommend doing a test print before you actually print on the forms to make sure the alignment's okay, because we can always make additional adjustments to the alignment. Once you print those out, we'll go back to our reporting tool here. And this time we're going to just select non-employee compensation. So I'm going to double click the header here, and little tip for Business One, if you have a column of checkboxes, double clicking the header will check everything or uncheck everything. So this time we're going to run the report, and we want to generate our 1099 NECs forms. So we're just going to choose non-employee compensation, click OK, show not submitted. And this is, we're going to return all the 1099 NEC information we need to report on. You'll remember I said that SAP we're still tracking all the data on the MISC form. It just needs to be printed out and reported on a different form for the IRS. So the data is still the same. We'll go up to our layout designer, and we can choose the other layout that can be defined in your system, specifically for the NEC. We'll set as default and update. And now when we do the print preview, it's going to pull in all that data, but this time it will align with the new 1099 NEC form, and you can print this data out onto those forms. Again, we always recommend doing a test print first to make sure the alignment's okay and there's no additional adjustments that need to be made. Now, once you have printed out your 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 NECs, it's time to do the 1096, which is a summary form that you populate for all of your 1099 miscellaneous or 1099 NECs. As we mentioned, that form has changed slightly this year because now it includes a checkbox to check for the 1099 NEC. So we'll choose 1096 form, and you'll notice that when I choose that, it goes to show submitted because it's assuming that you've already printed out your 1099 forms, so they would have been marked as submitted. I'm going to change this back just for demo because I haven't actually printed out the 1099 forms yet. And we're going to go through the same process. We'll make sure the 1099 miscellaneous form is selected, and under boxes, we're going to choose everything except non-employee compensation. So in this instance, we're creating a 1096 to record the 1099 miscellaneous forms that we are filing, and click OK. So now it's going to bring back a summary of all the data that got reported on the 1099 miscellaneous. We can go up to our layout designer, and again, putting in a new layout for the 1096 form for the 1099 miscellaneous. And when we do print preview, you can see that it will put an X, if you can visualize what the form looks like, where it will line up with the form checking the 1099 miscellaneous box. And once that is printed out, you can do the same thing for the 1099 NEC, where you'll go back under boxes, unselect everything, and just select non-employee compensation, because that's all that gets reported on the 1099 NEC. Leave it as show not submitted in my case, but for you, it will already be checked to show submitted, and we'll run this again. So now it's going to return everything that actually we are filing on the 1099 NEC. We'll go up to Layout Designer, switch to our other layout that can be put into your system, set as default, and update. And now when we do print preview, it's going to move the X over to check the other box that we need to check to file the 1096 form for the 1099 NEC. Now, I've been talking a lot about these forms and how to modify them, and you can certainly reach out to me or your PM or your support desk for assistance on these, but we've actually put together extensive documentation, and I'm actually going to go into a technical minute here on how to make the adjustments to these forms if you'd like. So the easiest way to get into the forms is to actually just go right here through the report. So let's say we want to modify our 1099 form for the MISC. We can do some quick selection criteria here. Select everything except the non-employee compensation and click OK. And we'll run this. Now up here in Layout Designer, when you click it, you get all the layouts you have in the system currently for this form. SAP out of the box does come with layouts already defined. They will have system after them in parentheses. So you can open up that system form by going to selecting it and doing Manage Layout. And then once it opens up the Report in Layout Manager, you can choose Edit. And it's going to open up the existing layout for that report. All of these boxes can be moved around and repositioned to match the new form for 2020 that you need to file on from the IRS. And this will be for the 1099 MISC. Now, to make this easier, we've actually done a test internally on our own SAP Business One system in-house. And I worked on this yesterday with our own accountant. And we determined all of the dimensions that need to be used for all of the different fields to match up to the new forms. So this will be available that you can actually go in, match up the field. So for instance, if we wanted to move our rent field around, it's field ID F36 here. So in the Excel spreadsheet, we'll go to our 1099 MISC form, and we'll go to the rents column, and you can adjust the left, width, top, and height dimensions that are used to position that field properly in the new layout. Once you make all your adjustments to the layout, you can right-click and save as, name it whatever you would like, MISC2 for 2020, or whatever you can identify as the new layout you should be using for this year to match the new forms. And you can do the same with the 1099 NEC just by starting with the miscellaneous, because it pulls in all the same data. Go back in under editing. Certain fields such as other income, you can mark as invisible. In the non-employee compensation field, which is field F44, just gets moved up to around here, and you can reference the Excel spreadsheet to get the exact dimensions you're going to use. And then just right-click Save As, and I'll just do 1099 form NEC duplicate. So then you can easily save a new layout to match the 1099 NEC form that you want to file this year. So that is a very quick technical minute on modifying those forms and how to get in there and make those adjustments. There is a whole document on what adjustments should be made based on our review of what changes this year. And again, that spreadsheet has all the dimensions that we've already lined up with one pre-printed form from the IRS, so it should be very easy to just modify those dimensions and make the new layouts. A couple other notes on this. If you'll notice when you're filing your 1099s, it does pull in the vendor tax ID. For certain vendors, this might be being stored as the contractor or vendor social security number. And this becomes important because when you print out this data, you're going to fold it and put it into an envelope. You want to be sure that the social security number, which you may be storing in this federal tax ID, is not showing in the envelope window. So when you're printing this data out, you can print it on the forms, just make sure that you're folding and that that specific information is not visible through the envelope window when you're filing the forms, or mailing them in rather. So that is the first option to maintain all the out-of-the-box SAP business functionality you already have, modifying the layouts, and then when you run the reporting, just coming up to Layout Designer and selecting the appropriate layout you need to use for the data you're running the report for. A lot of customers will track the data inside of Business One, but they actually will use a third-party software or third-party website to generate the forms. And this is still an option this year. You can utilize the out-of-the-box reports like we just showed to pull the data out of Business One and then populate it into a third-party website. As I mentioned earlier, we also created a query. So I'm going to go under Query Generator here, and I'm going to run the query real quick that we created. Let me pull this over. So we'll run this query.
Doing that, sorry to interrupt, but as Ben's moving on to this next one, feel free to, if you have any questions about that first method, feel free to add them in the chat and we can address them.
Right. So this query just pulls back all the same information as the out-of-the-box report, but it just pulls some additional information such as the vendor tax ID, as well as the vendor bill to address and your own company's address and tax ID if it's set up. This can be then exported or copied to an Excel spreadsheet that a lot of websites you can just import the Excel spreadsheet, map the fields, and then generate the forms. You also notice that it does tell you the existing form it's been recorded on for 2019, and then the new form and box selection for 2020 based on the data. If you're going to use this query, you just need to validate it against the out-of-the-box report to make sure these 1099 amounts are correct, and you don't need to make any adjustments to them before you generate your forms. An example of a website that we actually looked into a little bit is tax1099.com. It's a fairly simple site to use. Once you log in, it just lets you do a quick import via Excel spreadsheet. You can map your fields and then generate the forms you need to right from here. There is a small fee to use a website like this, but it does make the generation easy and does help with the filing process. So happy to take any questions you may have or dive deeper into reviewing anything. I'm going to pass it back over to Beth to go through some of the documentation we have, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you so much for covering that. It does look like we have a question from Wendy. So she said, how do I get my hands on the 1099 query report? So we'll include our email addresses right at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, and you can shoot us an email and we'll send that over to you. It is also included in, so these first couple documents you see on the documentation tab, I believe it's included in that second one, right? The reports.
No, these are the ones that updating ones is going to include the query at the end.
Perfect.
Yeah, just right there. So these documents are available.
Perfect. So that document will have the query on it as well. Thanks for asking, Wendy. So, we'll dive into the documentation here for a sec. We wanted to provide you with, as much documentation as possible to be able to help you through this transition easily. So those documents, those first ones, Ben put together, are really detailed documentation on what changes need to happen in SAP, how the reports need to be run, and it will go through, the same type of process that he showed here today. Beyond that, we've also linked the new forms, or, in the case of the 1096 or 1099 MISC, those updated forms with the renumbering and the checkbox. So you can get to those easily from here. And also on the blog side included this blog that we put out a couple weeks ago covering the 1099 changes, as well as our year-end activities blog. And then as always, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and there's lots of other resources there as well for any other training needs you have, and our tips and tricks LinkedIn page.
Hey, Beth, and thank you so much. And for the benefit of the group, and since we're going to release that recording only in a few days from now, could we maybe copy this documentation page and put it on the chat for the benefit of everyone?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Wendy, because I know all of you may want to start working on those, so we'll include them now here in the chat, so you could take a look at those details. Seems like there is another question here in the chat, Beth.
Yeah, so thanks for asking. We have a question. He said, I would like to know 1099 NEC is for non-EE or non-employee compensation / contractors. If we're making service fees to some lawyers, suppliers, should I use 1099 MISC for those type of payments? For 2019, I've reported all of these type of payments under 1099 MISC.
It's a great question. Depending on what type of service fees they are, like on the 1099 MISC, there is a box for gross proceeds paid to an attorney where you might be reporting that. I'm not sure the box number, but for something like that, I would really highly recommend reading the forms from the IRS and all the details on that to make sure that you're reporting those amounts in the correct area. Again, SAP does give you the opening balances functionality and the 1099 editing if you do need to move those amounts around. Throughout the year, you've been probably reporting them on a specific form and box, so you'll need to figure out what box it actually needs to be reported on, or if it needs to be reported on a different form entirely. I'm not sure the specifics on fees or supplier fees?
Yeah, great question. Great question. And again, we are not a legal advice. We are software people. So I would look at the IRS documentation like Ben suggested, or consult with your CPA to make sure it's on the right box.
Perfect. And you'll see in the chat, I'm including the links for the first two are the 1099 blog that we put out a few weeks ago and the year-end activities blog with the webinar recording. And then those next three links are for those IRS documents. So any other questions? All right, so just to recap, today we went over our year-end activities webinar, just a kind of quick introduction to that and what we covered there. Again, that link is in the chat for you. After that, moved on to just a high-level overview of what the new 1099 requirements are for 2020 moving forward. Then Ben took over, and in the live demo, we covered our 1099 setup in SAP, what needs to be done to support that processing, and what reports are available for 1099s, and then covered our options for handling 1099s under these new requirements. And then just now covered our documentation. So before we go ahead and wrap up today, any other questions that you may have? Perfect. Thanks, Cindy. So I will, and actually, Ben, can you move on to that next slide there? And that one has our emails on it.
Yes.
Perfect. So the emails are right there at the bottom. My email is Beth@PioneerB1, and Ben's email is Ben@PioneerB1. I like to keep it simple for you. So feel free to reach out to Ben, and he'll be able to provide those for you. And then, of course, as you move forward and you're making these changes, please reach out to us at Pioneer or support, and we'll help you out through that process.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we're good to close this out and stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, the filing date for these is January 31st. So, get in there, take a look, see what you might need to make adjustments for this year, and reach out to me, Beth, your PM, or the support desk, so that we can make sure you're all squared away in time for